and I see your slide. So that's the second part of the battle. So without further ado, Michael Prescott is going to tell us a little bit about what we don't know about the Nexus repository, perhaps that 80% of features and Nexus repository that that some of you don't yet use and some of our power users are using. So Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Derek. Actually, I have a slightly different spin on this. I'm going to talk about recent history and recent features. There's a lot of things that has happened both internally to the team and in terms of the feature sets that people don't know. That's what I'm really covering now. So as Derek said, I'm Michael Prescott. I'm the product owner for Nexus Repository 3. You probably learned you've probably learned this about us by now, that all the engineering team across all of Sonatype is fully remote. There's no two engineers in the same place. And I guess they decided sunny Toronto, Canada was a good place to get the product owner. I've been at Sonatype since April 2014. I've been the product owner of Nexus Repo for about half that time. If you want to reach out to me, you can do that using Twitter at devcasing. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about how you get in touch with me and the team in a whole bunch of other different ways as well. Okay, so in case you were told to attend this talk, first of all, I'm really sorry, but just to catch you up, Nexus Repo is a parts warehouse for all of your software components. In fact, it is the world's leading repository manager. We've got first-class support for a whole bunch of formats, including your favorites like Maven 2, Docker, NuGet Yum, Ruby Gems. We've got support for raw repositories, which lets you do all sorts of different things. But also we have a burgeoning community. I think I looked a few days ago and we were up to 48 community projects relating to either Nexus repository itself or other things at Sonatype. Head over to exchange.sonatype.com and Jeffrey Hesse will get you set up. Tell him that I sent you there. Among those offerings, we've got community supplied plugins for other formats that are popular. So we've got apt, P2, R, Helm, CPAN, and Conan. So what I wanted to talk about today, though, is about a kind of conversation that I end up having with users and customers of Nexus Pro. And it goes something like this. It's, someone will be saying to me, look, we really love our Nexus repo. We love the features that it has, but if only it could do this one other thing, we'd be really happy about that. And my reply is often something along the lines of, yeah, we actually shipped that a few versions ago. Which leads me to sad Kermit feelings because, a feature that nobody knows about isn't delivering any value to anybody. So clearly we need to do a better job of talking about the kinds of features that have been put in the application for your use. Why do we have this problem? I mean, maybe we're following the old writer's advice of show, don't tell, which is probably good for writers, novelists, and hobbyist screenplay writers, but maybe not good for an application development team with a globally used application. But I think the other reason is that we are accelerating development with Nexus Repository 3. The pace has picked up substantially, and there's actually a lot of new features that have been built in that people just don't know about yet. Okay, so a little bit of history. Nexus Repo 3, we had a first version of, first public milestone of 3 in January 2016, so just over 2.5 years ago. That was milestone 7. It was the end of a long development period of a new architecture for Nexus Repository. We did that because we wanted to have first-class support for a whole bunch of different software ecosystems. That was really important to us to be able to implement new ecosystems quickly, to be able to roll out features across a whole bunch of different formats and ecosystems without having big disparities as we had done with Nexus Repository 2. Now, Repo 2 is a solid product. It's still in use at scale. But the implementations of other formats like Yum and NPM, those don't fit naturally into a Maven-centric architecture. And Nexus Repo 3 really was an opportunity for us to do a ground-up implementation that made it really, really easy for us to deliver features to a whole bunch of different ecosystems all at once. So when we shipped that, it had 5 formats: Maven, Raw, NuGet, NPM, which we'd had before, and also a new format, Docker. Over 2016, we started a bunch of big efforts. So we started the development of high availability clustering, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But we also shipped new formats, Bower, PyPy, Ruby Gems. We did a lot of performance and scalability work. We made it so that it was easy to migrate between 2 and 3. And we added support for firewall, which I'll also, again, talk a little bit about later. Across the beginning of the first half of 2017, we added another format, Git LFS. We did yet more performance and scalability work. one of the things that happens with 2, with its long history, is that we've been able to grow organically. As new users come onto 3, people are saying things like, I've got 5 terabytes, I want to migrate straight into that right away. And we've got to be ready to go 0 to 60 with those customers at the scale that they're already at very quickly. So we've put a lot of effort into that. We had a new format. We started development on Yum with Yum Proxy, and then we shipped a GA version of the high availability clusters. Okay, and what we found is that as we've entered those new ecosystems, our user activity has gone tremendously up. We're literally into millions of users now. So one of the things that this does is, as we have more users, we have more use cases. We have more components, more types of components, not just different formats from different ecosystems, but also just the sheer variety of things that people are doing with existing formats. We have to adapt to more situations. We get way more requests from a diversity of users, and as I said, at ever higher scales. I happen to know that there's a Nexus Repository 3 instance out there that's serving over 25 million requests per day as part of a farm that's handling 1 billion requests per month. So we're definitely there at scale. Okay, so that's the stuff you can see from the outside. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on inside the team, what's going on developmentally. And I want to do that from a slightly personal perspective. So I'm going to jump back 4.5 years, I guess, to April 2014. This is the first engineering meetup that I attended. Literally, it was my first week at Sonatype. And the format for this was, as I said, we're all remote, so it's really important for us to get together to meet our coworkers. And in my case, it was a fantastic opportunity to do that while I was still so new. There I am in the top row with the black t-shirt with a little crest on it. And the format for this meetup was everybody was going to present something to everybody else at the engineering team. Now, I have to say, I was a little starstruck by the caliber of people that I was working with suddenly. I was used to being a big fish in a small pond, and now I could literally turn to anybody in this organization and learn 5, jaw-dropping technical things from anyone I could turn to. So when they said we'd like everybody to present something that nobody else knows, that's really going to, give them a unique perspective, I was more than a little nervous about the caliber. So what I turned to was something called Sociometry. It's a tool. It's actually analog social network analysis from the dark ages, before we even had anything called social networks. It's a tool for finding your place, and that requires information. So it's a face-to-face social exercise. Now, I'm not going to talk about sociometry a lot, but one of the things that it allowed me to do is really keep tabs on the size of the engineering organization, because this exercise was very successful. We revisit it each year, and so I've been wrangling an ever larger crowd through this exercise at the beginning of our meetups. So here you go, a few years later, look at the size of the engineering team. And we can't always, all of us make it. There's Daniel Sobel, who you'll hear from a little later, attending remotely, like a little R2D2 unit. But we keep growing. Here's us making a map of all the different parts of the world that the engineering organization comes from. And here we are, all lined up by tenure. So if you squint and really lean into your monitor, you might be able to see against the presentation board on the right-hand side, a little tiny Brian Fox there as employee number 1 of the engineering organization. So obviously, that is not all of the Nexus repository team. We have a bunch of different products, a bunch of different operations and data teams here, but this is proportional to the amount of investment that we're making in the Nexus repository team. In April 2014, when I started, we had 1 team of generalists. In June 2018, we have 4 teams, 4 specialized teams, all contributing to Nexus repository in different ways. Okay, one of the things that we've done with that increased investment is accelerate the release cadence. So you can see back in early 2014, we're hitting 70 days, 65 days between releases. This is a rolling average. Now we're averaging more like 25 or 30 days between releases. This is a substantial increase in the frequency of releases. So one of the things, we hate shelfware. We don't like writing functionality that nobody can actually benefit from. So we're releasing more frequently to get the software into your hands faster. Now, of course, we know not everybody can update to every version. It doesn't make sense for an organization perhaps to update every single one, but we know that somebody can benefit from every version, which is why we're committed to doing this. Okay, not only are we releasing faster, but we are releasing more. This is a slide out of our Jira. I've changed the colors. Blue represents all of the issues, bugs, stories, features, improvements that we've implemented. That thin green wedge, which you can see steadily thickening, I hope, if you maybe squint at the slide, is the in-progress work, and the orange is the ever-growing pile of things we want to get to. And but what I want to draw your attention to is the rate at which that development speed is increasing. So if you look at these inflection points, there's a couple of pronounced ones in 2015 and then in the early 2016, and maybe that last one's a little bit of product owner optimism, but it definitely mirrors our subjective experience that we are releasing software significantly faster and new features are coming out. So we built a lot of things. We're still accelerating. So it isn't surprising to me, really, if you've missed hearing about a couple things that I want to go over and hit the highlights. So one of those is UI upload. So this was a much requested feature. It was very popular in Nexus Repo 2. It is a way to take components that you've got from perhaps a third-party vendor or that were produced with some offline process or air gap perhaps, and upload them manually one at a time. You can choose the coordinates. If you're using Maven, it will generate a synthetic POM. If you are using other component formats, then it will generate all the appropriate metadata for that, so you can seamlessly use it in search and all the other features. And it integrates with our tagging feature. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, blob stores. So you may or may not know, internally Nexus Repository 3 stores two different kinds of information about your components. It holds metadata in a metadata database. So that's all the information about coordinates, about deployment time, who deployed it, all the audit information, but it also holds the binaries themselves. Of course, those are stored in a object store-like system on the file system, but we've added support for using S3 as the backing storage for those binaries. That was also much requested. This has a powerful affinity with any AWS-based deployments, especially HA clusters, because you can use it as a shared file store between that cluster. This actually started life as a community implementation. So I'd like to thank Andrew Taylor for getting that started. We also have community implication implications. What's the implication of stumbling on that word? Implementations for other object storage, such as Google Cloud Object Storage. So if you're interested in that, go again to the community, tell Jeffrey I sent you, and check that out. Okay, I'm going to shift gear a little bit. So you may not know this, and if you have been a diehard repo customer and not exposed to our other offerings, this may surprise you, but Sonatype produces the world's most comprehensive and accurate database of OS vulnerability and license information for open source components. We have an offering called Firewall, which will allow you to stop those components ever entering your software development lifecycle. It is a fantastic way to get into some of the value add offerings we have. Formerly, this was only available as an add-on to Nexus Repository Pro, but we know that if you don't happen to need the Pro features of Nexus Repo, you can now benefit from snapping a firewall on and getting the benefit of all the information we have about these open source ecosystems. Okay, REST. Everybody asks about REST. When will REST be done? When will you have this feature? One of the things we wanted to do is add a console inside Nexus Repo to make it as easy as possible for people to get up-to-date information about what we support, to learn it and play with it. So the Swagger API is built right into Nexus Repository. You can see there on the navigation, click the API option, and you will get a console. It's an interactive console that will allow you to see all of our endpoints. And we have a lot of endpoints now. We have endpoints for content, for searching, for managing your HA clusters, all sorts of provisioning tasks that you might want to do, setting up repositories, users, monitoring and setting up scheduled tasks, and for the staging and tagging features that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So this console lets you learn what we have. It lets you actually try them out interactively. Once you've done that, you can take those commands. It will generate curl commands for you that you can then copy and paste and use in your scripting. For your provisioning or whatever kind of administration you're doing from a command line perspective. And you can even use the extended Swagger toolchain to generate clients to make it really easy to automatically control your Nexus Repo instances. Okay, so tree view. When we implemented multiple format support as a first-class citizen, we decided that because a lot of formats were not hierarchical, the best way to browse all of the content was through a search-based paradigm. Turns out, well, everybody loves tree view. So we've brought tree view back, the much requested feature. It is a natural and popular way to explore hierarchical content. Not all formats are hierarchical. So, maybe browsing your Docker layers and your Git LFS objects is not naturally done through a tree view, but for others, it is actually a handy way to get in there and start administering, checking your metadata and audit information. There's also an HTML view. There's a little view up there in the top left that links to an HTML view you can use. It brings back a popular feature from Nexus Repo 2. Please don't scrape that. We've got REST endpoints for that now, but if you want to use that, go ahead and do that. Okay, Yum. I mentioned that we started on Yum proxy. This is a completely ground up re-implementation of Yum. It was a popular format in Nexus Repo 2, but we needed to make it perform better. So we've got now proxy, hosted, and group support. And we've been through a second round of performance enhancements to metadata generation to really help this work at scale. High availability clusters. So Nexus 3 is a rock solid application. If you've got a single node and you're administering that, you'll know that. But if you need to go that last mile and you need to support high availability, you can do that when in conjunction with your load balancing system and some kind of shared blob storage, for which S3 is a perfect choice now, especially if you're deploying into Amazon. You can set up a cluster of Nexus nodes, Nexus Repo nodes. They'll communicate with one another. They'll share and vote on component metadata and allow you to get that extra few points of availability out of your Nexus deployment. Now, here's a fun one, staging. This is a newer feature. So if you are using Nexus Repo, you're at scale, you've got a whole bunch of teams piling content in, and I'm just representing that here with teams A and B. But you might have 20 teams or more. You've got an issue that's accumulating. You've got new untested and approved components all mixed into the same hosted repository. So what that does is exposes you to a particular kind of problem, which is that your QA and UAT users might be picking up components that are not really ready. They're not really signed off or ready for those UAT processes. You might even have production deployment systems that could inadvertently pick up components that have yet been through all those quality gateways. So what we've done is we've added a batch of staging features to help protect you from those situations. Okay, so the way this works, we've got REST endpoints, and it's based on a very simple but flexible and powerful search paradigm. So anything you can search for, you can then, through REST call, move and delete that around inside your Nexus repository. So we expect this to be orchestrated by your CI/CD tooling. That's a big difference from how we implemented things for staging in Nexus Repository 2. But it builds on the primitives that you already know for Nexus repository security, and it's powered by tagging, which I'll cover in a second. It makes it very, very flexible. So what I'm about to show you is an archetypal staging workflow, but it's only an archetype. You can actually set this up a whole bunch of different ways. But in this example, you've got a team A development, and they're pushing their components into a hosted repository. These are untested components. When they're ready for UAT, either they or Jenkins or any other external orchestration system makes a single REST call, takes those components and puts them into another hosted repo called ready for UAT. You could call that whatever you like. Nexus Repo doesn't attach semantics to this. That's just all implied by the privileges that you've given various users. In this case, QA and UAT stakeholders can't pick up content from your untested components. They just can't see those yet. They're not made available. However, they can see everything in the ready for UAT. They can make REST calls. They can use their format clients to download that content and perform whatever automated or manual processes you have in that pipeline. When those gateways are passed, you can make another REST call and move things over to a production-ready repo, some kind of prod, prod hosted repo. Now you've got your production-ready stakeholders can see those things, and not a moment before. So you've got production deployment systems and other teams that are using properly gated and vetted components as dependencies in their own development. Okay. One of the advantages of implementing staging the way we did is that it is very flexible for things that are not necessarily classic staging operations. So you can actually treat it as a generic move by Gav. You can find components, you can issue searches, and use that for generically administering your components and moving them around through REST calls. It also gives you a way to implement some custom cleanup operations, for example, scripting them externally by curl. If you can search for it, you can move it or delete it. And another thing that works really well with staging is having different cleanup policies by stage. So just going back to the slide, if you've got untested components that for some reason have not been promoted and made it through that quality gateway to be indicated ready for UAT. Maybe you only want to keep those for 5 or 10 days, maybe 15. UAT components you might keep for a longer time. And production ready, that's going to, of course, be governed by whatever retention policies you have internally or regulatory requirements imposed externally. And you could move these things to a long-term storage in an archive repo with, backed by S3, potentially with a very different cleanup policy. So it allows you a lot of flexibility to implement your pipeline the way you need to. Okay, tagging. So here's a little cartoon repository with only 8 components in it. I'm just using this to illustrate tagging. So you can make a REST call, search for components, and apply a tag to them. Tags A, B, and C I've got here. The only requirement is that these are globally unique in all of repo. If you're using this for staging, these are going to be something like build IDs, maybe organization, project name, and then version. And you can apply these to arbitrary sets of components. It's very flexible. You can have overlapping sets. You can do single components. Components can have, tags can have thousands and thousands of components in them. You can have tags with a single component in them. And this works really well with staging. Because you can apply tags as you upload. We've added a new REST, or a series of REST endpoints, in fact, for a bunch of different formats, so that as you promote content publish it into your Nexus repository, you can atomically add a tag. In most cases, that would be a build tag. But again, I mentioned this through manual upload. You can apply a tag right there. And then you can use that tag throughout the rest of your life cycle as implemented by that chain of hosted repos, or for any other purposes to kind of promote those, move those around, or delete them. So it's very, very powerful and flexible together. All right. Not only can you use tags in a flexible way, we've added the ability to add tag documents to these. So each tag has an optional user-supplied JSON document. You can add custom information to each component, to sets of components. There's one document per tag. You can put anything in there you like. I mean, it's limited to 20K. Please don't start base 64 encoding your Docker images and stuffing them in there. It's not a generic content management system, but for small amounts of metadata, it's the perfect way to annotate your components. You can link to external resources, for example, reports or database records held in other audit systems. You can put audit information about the build that produced those, for example, the versions of tooling, or who initiated it, or what node it was built on and when. You could put information about the quality gates that have been passed annotating those components directly. And some users have actually recorded downstream consumption information. For example, that this component was actually pushed to production on such and such a date. It's very flexible. Okay, that's the roll-up of features. I wanted to just hit the highlights that you may not have heard about or really fully had time to understand what the implications were for your organization. There is, of course, an endless tide of smaller improvements with our improved release cadence. Those come out regularly. They're too numerous to mention, but definitely keep tabs on the release notes to see if anything is relevant to you. But actually, so we don't have to wait until the next time we have one of these conferences to roll up features. There's a couple places you can stay in touch with us and understand what we're doing. One of them is right in your Nexus repo user interface. So this is the outreach content, and I think Daniel Sobel is going to be giving a talk a little bit later, and he's going to touch on some of the improvements that they've done here. They've put a lot of effort into trying making this useful for people. You can see an ad for this very conference here, but a lot of times you'll see information about new features, new versions that are available. You will also see surveys. So we will request information from you. If you are at all inclined to provide information to us, please engage with those surveys. We do use that to shape how we do feature development. There's also a bunch of other ways to keep up to date. So you can use the Nexus users mailing list. You can join the Nexus Pro announce mailing list if you're a pro customer. And every time we do new feature development, we'll write a blog post. We put it up on blog.sonatype.com. So go there and subscribe. You'll get updates about Nexus Repo, but other products as well as interesting information from our CTO about the landscape of open source development. Okay, if you want to connect with us, specifically the Nexus Repo team, again, Nexus users is a great way to do that. If you've got questions, you might get help from other users. We also have a new community site, community.sonatype.com. If you don't want to use a mailing list, you'd rather use a site that's more fully featured, come on there, start topics, ask us questions. The development team is going to be engaging with people there. If you have feedback on a specific feature, you're using staging, you're using REST, and you want to give us feedback to shape the development of that, hit us up at nexusfeedback@sonatype.com. If it is not working for you, head over to issues@sonatype.org and file a JIRA request, and we'll get your information to the right place. Okay, thanks very much. I hope you learned something, and jump on over to the Slack channel. You can ask questions. I'll be hanging out there for a little while, and get connected. Thank you very much.